Rain fell like shattered glass across the neon-soaked streets of Los Angeles, Koreatown, each droplet catching the crimson and gold lights of closed storefronts before dissolving into the flooded gutters below. Rita Domingo pulled her thin jacket tighter against her body as she stepped out of Han's Garden restaurant, her sneakers immediately soaking through as she hit the sidewalk. The clock had just struck midnight, and her legs ached from 12 hours of carrying heavy trays and forcing smiles at customers who looked through her like she was furniture. She walked quickly, head down, her small messenger bag pressed against her hip. The streets were nearly empty now, just the occasional taxi splashing through puddles and the distant thrum of bass from a club 3 blocks away. She didn't notice the black sedan parked across the street. She didn't see the man in the driver's seat lower his phone. And she definitely didn't realize that the conversation she had accidentally overheard 20 minutes ago, the one between Daniel Park and the man with the snake tattoo crawling up his neck, had just placed a target on her back. Sometimes we stumble into other people's secrets without meaning to, and sometimes those secrets refuse to let us walk away. If this story resonates with you, please like, share, and subscribe. Rita quickened her pace as the rain intensified, her natural hair beginning to curl tighter against her scalp despite the silk scarf she had wrapped around it that morning. The familiar route home usually took 15 minutes, cutting through the alley behind the Korean grocery store and past the abandoned laundromat that had closed 2 years ago. Tonight, the shadows seemed deeper, the silence between raindrops heavier. She couldn't stop replaying what she had heard. The private dining room at the back of Han's Garden was supposed to be empty. She had only entered to collect the dirty dishes left behind from an earlier meeting, her arms already full of stacked plates and crumpled napkins. The voices had frozen her in place, hidden behind the ornate wooden partition that separated the main dining area from the exclusive space reserved for special guests. Daniel Park's voice was unmistakable, smooth, confident, educated. He had been working for Mr. Choi for as long as Rita had been employed at the restaurant, nearly 2 years now. Everyone knew Daniel was the boss's right hand, his translator, his voice in a country where Mr. Choi struggled to communicate. The staff whispered that Daniel was untouchable, that crossing him meant crossing the organization itself. But the words Daniel spoke to the tattooed man didn't match the words he had translated to Mr. Choi just 30 minutes earlier. Rita had stood motionless, plates balanced precariously in her arms, as Daniel laughed softly and said in perfect English, "He still doesn't suspect anything. I told him the Chin family wants to renegotiate the port contracts, but they're actually moving their shipments through our territory starting next month. By the time Jae-hoon realizes what's happening, I'll have already secured my arrangement with them. 5 years of building his trust, and the fool still can't understand a single conversation without me whispering in his ear." The tattooed man had responded with something about payments and percentages, but Rita's heart had been pounding so loudly in her ears that she missed the details. She had backed away slowly, somehow managing not to drop anything, and slipped through the kitchen door just as she heard footsteps approaching the partition. Now, walking through the rain-drenched streets, she felt the weight of that knowledge pressing against her chest like a physical burden. She heard footsteps behind her. Rita didn't turn around immediately. She told herself it was just another late-night worker heading home, just a stranger with no connection to her or the dangerous men whose secrets she now carried. But the footsteps matched her pace perfectly, speeding up when she walked faster, slowing when she hesitated at the corner. She broke into a run. Her sneakers slapped against the wet pavement as she darted into the alley behind the grocery store, her lungs burning as the cold rain bit at her exposed skin. The footsteps followed, faster now, no longer bothering to disguise their pursuit. Rita's mind raced through her options. Her phone was nearly dead. Her apartment was still 8 blocks away, and she didn't know anyone in this neighborhood who would open their door at midnight for a soaking wet stranger. She rounded the corner and collided directly with a solid chest. Strong hands caught her shoulders before she could fall, steadying her with a grip that was firm but not painful. Rita looked up, rainwater streaming down her face, and found herself staring into the cold, unreadable eyes of Jae-hoon Choi. He looked exactly as he always did when he visited the restaurant, impeccably dressed in a dark tailored coat over what she could only assume was an expensive suit. his black hair slightly damp but still perfectly styled, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. But this close, she noticed things she had never seen before. The small scar near his left eyebrow, the tension in his jaw, the way his gaze assessed her face with an intensity that made her feel like he was cataloging every detail for future reference. "You are the waitress," he said, his Korean accent thick but his English passable. "From my restaurant." Rita swallowed hard, acutely aware of his hands still gripping her shoulders, of the two large men who had materialized from the shadows behind him, of the black sedan that was now idling at the entrance to the alley. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Jae-hoon's eyes flicked to somewhere over her shoulder, and his expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Someone follows you." It wasn't a question. Before Rita could respond, Jae-hoon released her shoulders and stepped around her, positioning his body between her and whatever threat had been pursuing her through the rain. He spoke rapid Korean to his men, too fast for Rita to pretend she didn't understand, and she caught words like "find him" and "don't kill yet" and "I want answers." The two men disappeared into the darkness without a sound. Rita stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs, as Jae-hoon turned back to face her. The rain had begun to soak through his expensive coat, but he didn't seem to notice or care. His attention was fixed entirely on her, those dark eyes searching her face for something she couldn't identify. "You will come with me," he said. Another statement, not a question. "I was just walking home." Rita finally found her voice, though it came out shakier than she would have liked. "I don't know why anyone would follow me. I'm just a waitress." Something flickered in Jae-hoon's expression. Not quite amusement, but something close to it. "You were in the private room tonight. I know this because I was told the dishes needed collecting after my meeting." He paused, tilting his head slightly as he studied her. "What did you hear, little waitress?" The question hung in the rain-soaked air between them, heavy with implication. Rita knew she had two choices. She could lie, claim ignorance, hope that whoever had followed her would lose interest once they realized she was just a nobody who understood nothing. Or she could tell the truth and potentially become even more entangled in a world she had spent her entire life avoiding. She thought about her grandmother back in Lagos, the woman who had taught her Korean through patient repetition and old films borrowed from the library, who had always said that truth was a currency more valuable than gold because it could never be counterfeited. "I heard enough," Rita said quietly. "Enough to know that not everyone who serves you is actually serving you." Later that night, Rita found herself sitting in the back seat of Jae-hoon's private car, her wet clothes slowly soaking into the leather upholstery as they drove through the empty streets toward a destination she hadn't been told. Jae-hoon sat across from her in the spacious vehicle, his long legs stretched out and his fingers steepled beneath his chin, as he watched her with that same unsettling intensity. Daniel Park sat beside him. Rita's entire body had gone rigid the moment Daniel climbed into the car, his familiar smile firmly in place as he greeted her with cheerful surprise. "Rita, what are you doing out so late? And in this weather?" He turned to Jae-hoon and spoke rapid Korean, translating nothing because Jae-hoon had asked nothing. "Boss, this is one of our best servers. She's been with us almost 2 years now. Very reliable, very quiet. Perfect employee." Jae-hoon nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Rita's face. "Ask her what she heard tonight." Daniel's smile didn't falter as he turned back to Rita. "Mr. Choi wants to know what exactly happened this evening. Were you the one who called for a car? Was there some kind of emergency?" The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Daniel hadn't even paused to consider that Rita might understand exactly what Jae-hoon had actually asked. He was so certain of her ignorance, so confident in the assumption that a Nigerian waitress couldn't possibly comprehend the language of his carefully constructed deceptions. Rita felt a strange calm settle over her fear. "Mr. Choi asked what I heard tonight," she said, looking directly at Daniel. "Not why I needed a car." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel's smile froze on his face, his dark eyes widening almost imperceptibly before the mask slammed back into place. He laughed, the sound bright and dismissive. "I'm sorry, you must have misheard. My Korean isn't always perfect, and Mr. Choi has a strong accent." Let me translate properly. You told the man with the snake tattoo that the Chun family is moving shipments through Mr. Choi's territory next month. Rita interrupted, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. You said you've been building his trust for 5 years, and he still doesn't understand a single conversation without you whispering in his ear. You said he's a fool. The words landed like grenades. Jae-hoon's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. A storm gathering strength beneath an eerily calm surface. He spoke slowly, each word precise and measured, his gaze never leaving Daniel's face. Tell me she is lying. Daniel's composure cracked. Just slightly, just for a moment, but Rita saw it. The flash of panic, the desperate calculation of a man watching his carefully built empire begin to crumble. He recovered quickly, his voice dripping with practiced sincerity. Boss, this woman is clearly confused. She probably heard fragments of a conversation and misinterpreted. I said. Jae-hoon repeated, his tone dropping to something dangerously quiet. Tell me she is lying. Look me in the eyes, Daniel. And tell me that this waitress who supposedly knows nothing has invented an elaborate conspiracy against my most trusted advisor. The car had stopped moving. Rita only noticed now the absence of motion, the heavy silence of the engine. Through the tinted windows, she could see they had arrived at what appeared to be a private residence. A modern architectural marvel of glass and steel that loomed against the rainy sky like a fortress. Daniel's mask finally shattered. You don't understand, he said, and now his voice carried an edge of desperation. Everything I've done because you refused to adapt. You refused to learn the language, refused to trust anyone with real information, refused to let anyone else make decisions. Do you know what it's like to spend 5 years translating for a man who treats you like furniture? I built half the connections you rely on. I negotiated deals you don't even know exist. Without me, you would have been destroyed years ago. Jae-hoon listened in perfect stillness. When Daniel finished, his chest heaving with suppressed emotion, Jae-hoon finally spoke. I trusted you. 3 words, delivered without heat or drama. Somehow more devastating than any threat could have been. I trusted you with my words, my thoughts, my vulnerabilities. I gave you access to everything because I believed you were the one person who would never betray that trust. Jae-hoon paused, and for just a moment, Rita saw something raw and wounded flash across his carefully controlled features. I was wrong. He spoke in Korean to someone Rita couldn't see, and suddenly the car doors were opening, hands were reaching in, and Daniel was being pulled out into the rain with surprising efficiency. He screamed something, a mixture of threats and pleas, but the sound was cut off abruptly as the doors closed again. Rita sat alone with Jae-hoon in the silence that followed. He didn't speak for a long moment, simply staring out the rain-streaked window at the place where Daniel had disappeared. When he finally turned to look at her, his expression had shifted into something she couldn't quite read. Not anger, not gratitude, but something complicated and layered. You took a great risk tonight, he said. Why? Rita thought about the question seriously before answering. Because my grandmother always said that silence in the face of injustice makes you complicit in the crime. And because... She hesitated, then continued honestly, I don't know. It just felt wrong to let you be destroyed by someone you trusted. Nobody deserves that kind of betrayal. Many people would say I deserve exactly that, Jae-hoon observed quietly. I am not a good man, Miss Domingo. I have done things that would horrify you. I know who you are, Rita replied. Everyone at the restaurant knows. But being a criminal doesn't mean you deserve to be betrayed by someone you love. The word hung between them, love, uncomfortable and raw and far too intimate for a conversation between strangers. Jae-hoon looked away first. You will stay here tonight, he said, his tone brooking no argument. Whoever followed you through the rain may still be looking. Until I understand the full scope of Daniel's betrayal, anyone with knowledge of his actions is potentially in danger. Including you. Rita opened her mouth to protest. She had work tomorrow. Her apartment was waiting. She didn't belong in this world of luxury cars and glass mansions. But something in Jae-hoon's expression stopped her. Not a threat. Something almost like concern. Just until morning, she said finally. He nodded once, then opened his door and stepped out into the rain without waiting to see if she would follow. The following morning, Rita woke disoriented in a bedroom that looked like something from an architectural magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the Los Angeles skyline, still gray and rain-washed in the early dawn light. The sheets beneath her were softer than anything she had ever slept on, and someone had left fresh clothes folded neatly on a chair beside the bed. Simple but expensive items that somehow fit her perfectly. She found the bathroom attached to her guest room and stood under the rainfall shower for longer than necessary, trying to process the events of the previous night. Daniel Park was gone. She had exposed a 5-year betrayal to one of the most dangerous men in the city. And now she was standing naked in that dangerous man's house, wearing his hospitality like bar armor. When she finally emerged from the bedroom, dressed in clothing that had provided soft gray cashmere sweater, dark fitted jeans, simple leather flats, she followed the sound of voices down a sweeping staircase into what appeared to be a combination kitchen and gathering space. Jae-hoon sat at a long marble counter, a cup of coffee untouched before him, speaking rapid Korean into his phone. Several men she didn't recognize stood at various points around the room, their postures casual but their eyes alert, clearly guards of some kind. A woman about Rita's age was moving efficiently around the kitchen, preparing what looked like a traditional Korean breakfast of rice, soup, and various small dishes. Everyone fell silent when Rita appeared. Jae-hoon ended his call without taking his eyes off her. In the morning light, away from the rain and the chaos of the previous night, he looked different somehow. Still intimidating, still radiating that particular stillness that made people nervous, but also more human. She noticed the shadows beneath his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the slight furrow between his brows that spoke of sleepless hours and difficult decisions. "You slept well?" he asked, his English more careful in front of his subordinates. "Yes, thank you." Rita approached the counter slowly, acutely aware of every eye in the room following her movement. The room was very comfortable. Jae-hoon gestured to the seat beside him, and Rita sat, trying to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel. The woman who had been cooking placed a steaming bowl of soup in front of her without meeting her eyes. Whether from deference or hostility, Rita couldn't tell. "We have much to discuss," Jae-hoon said. "But first you will eat." It wasn't a request. Rita ate. The soup was delicious, rich with beef and vegetables and the particular umami depth that she had grown to love about Korean cuisine. She ate slowly, giving herself time to observe the dynamics in the room, to notice the way Jae-hoon's men kept their distance but remained constantly aware of his position, to see how he commanded attention simply by existing. By the time she finished, most of the guards had quietly dispersed, leaving only one older man standing near the door and the cook cleaning up in the kitchen. "Daniel's network is larger than I understood," Jae-hoon said without preamble, setting down his phone and turning to face her fully. "He has been feeding information to 3 separate organizations for almost 4 years. He altered translations to create conflicts that didn't exist, to destroy alliances that would have strengthened my position, to position himself as indispensable while slowly bleeding my empire dry." Rita absorbed this information silently. "Without your intervention last night, I would have discovered none of this until it was too late." Jae-hoon paused, something complicated moving behind his eyes. "You understand what this means?" "You owe me," Rita asked, not quite joking. "You are in danger," he corrected flatly. "Daniel has associates who do not know he has been exposed. The man who followed you last night was likely sent to determine how much you heard and whether you posed a threat to their operations. Now that Daniel has been removed from his position, those associates will be searching for answers. And you are the most obvious source of information." The weight of his words settled over Rita like a cold blanket. "I can't stay here forever," she said. "I have a life. I have a job. I have rent to pay and you no longer work at the restaurant." Rita's mouth snapped shut. "It is not safe," Jae-hoon continued, apparently oblivious to her rising frustration. "The restaurant is a known location. Anyone looking for you would find you easily there. Additionally, many of the staff are loyal to Daniel, whether they know the full extent of his activities or not. Until I have fully audited my organization, I cannot guarantee your safety in that environment. So what am I supposed to do? Rita demanded, her fear momentarily overridden by irritation. Hide in your guest room forever? Pretend I don't have a life because I made the mistake of telling you the truth. Something flickered in Jae-hoon's expression. Surprise, perhaps, at being challenged so directly. You will stay here temporarily. You will be compensated for your time. And when the situation has been resolved, you will be free to return to whatever life you choose, with additional resources to ensure your safety and comfort. You're basically describing a prison with better bedding. The corner of Jae-hoon's mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was the closest thing to one Rita had seen from him. Most prisoners do not receive designer clothing and gourmet meals. Most prisoners also didn't save their captors' entire empire from collapse. This time, Jae-hoon did smile, brief and small, but genuine. You are not what I expected, Miss Domingo. Rita, she corrected automatically. And what did you expect? He considered the question seriously. Fear, submission, perhaps negotiation for money or favors. Instead you sit in my kitchen and compare my hospitality to imprisonment. He shook his head slowly, something almost like respect entering his gaze. You are either very brave or very foolish. My grandmother always said the two things are closely related. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She was. Rita felt the familiar ache of loss settle briefly over her heart. She died 3 years ago, but she taught me everything I know about surviving in a world that doesn't always want you to succeed. Jae-hoon was quiet for a moment. She taught you Korean. She taught me many things. Korean was just one of them. Rita hesitated, then continued. She spent 15 years working for a Korean family in Lagos. Childcare mostly, but she became close with the family over time. When I was little, she would teach me phrases, songs, the stories she remembered from the children she had helped raise. By the time I was a teenager, I could understand almost everything. Speaking took longer, but she shrugged. I had time, and I loved the challenge. Is that why you came to Korea? To honor her memory? Rita considered how to answer. Partly, but mostly because I had nothing left in Nigeria except memories. My grandmother was my only family. When she died, I needed to go somewhere new, somewhere I could build something different. I came here on a work visa, intending to stay for maybe a year or two. That was almost 5 years ago. And yet you work as a waitress in a restaurant owned by criminals. A job is a job. Rita met his eyes directly. Not everyone has the luxury of being picky about their employers. And before you say anything, I know what Hans Garden really is. Everyone who works there knows. We just pretend we don't. It's easier that way. Jae-hoon studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You are remarkable, Rita Domingo. Remarkably honest. Remarkably unafraid. Remarkably unusual. He paused. I am not accustomed to people like you. People who tell the truth. People who have no agenda. He rose from his seat, adjusting the cuffs of his pristine white shirt. Everyone in my world wants something. Power, money, protection, revenge. But you, he shook his head. You told me the truth about Daniel with no expectation of reward. You accepted my hospitality without negotiation. You challenge me without fear of consequence. I do not understand you. Maybe that's because you've never met someone who actually doesn't want anything from you. The words landed with unexpected weight. Jae-hoon stood very still, something shifting behind his eyes that Rita couldn't identify. For a moment, the mask of the powerful Mafia boss slipped, revealing something younger, more vulnerable. A man who had perhaps spent his entire life being wanted only for what he could provide. Then the mask returned, and he straightened to his full height. I have business to attend to, he said, his voice carefully neutral. You may explore the house freely, but do not attempt to leave without escort. My men will bring you anything you need. We will speak again this evening. He was gone before Rita could respond. Minutes after Jae-hoon's departure, the older guard approached Rita with a respectful bow and introduced himself as Mr. Kim. He explained that he would be her primary point of contact during her stay, that anything she needed could be requested through him, and that she should feel free to treat the house as her own. Rita spent the day exploring. The house was enormous. A sprawling modern estate that somehow managed to feel both coldly elegant and surprisingly comfortable. She found a library filled with books in Korean, English, and several other languages. She discovered a private gym, a home theater, and a garden enclosed entirely in glass that was bursting with orchids and other exotic flowers. She wandered through sitting rooms decorated with what she suspected was priceless art, past security stations manned by polite but watchful guards, through hallways that seemed designed to impress rather than comfort. But nowhere did she find anything personal. No photographs of family, no memorabilia from childhood, no indication that Jae-hoon Choi was anything other than a carefully constructed image of wealth and power. The house felt less like a home and more like a museum, beautiful and empty and somehow lonely. By evening, Rita had settled in the library with a novel she had found, something literary and translated from Korean that she was struggling to appreciate. She was so absorbed in her reading that she didn't notice Jae-hoon's arrival until he spoke from the doorway. "That book is about betrayal." Rita looked up, startled. He had changed from his earlier attire into something slightly more casual, dark slacks. A simple black sweater that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it, and there was a tension in his posture that hadn't been there that morning. "Bad timing?" she asked, holding up the book. "Appropriate timing, perhaps." He moved into the room and settled into the chair across from hers, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something subtle and expensive that made her suddenly aware of how small the space between them had become. "I have spent the day learning exactly how thoroughly Daniel betrayed me." Rita set the book aside. "How bad is it?" "Worse than I imagined." He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes briefly. "He has been manipulating my communications for almost 5 years. 5 years of altered translations, fabricated threats, manufactured crises designed to keep me dependent on his services. He turned allies into enemies by telling each side what would inflame them most. He stole money through negotiations I never actually agreed to. Jae-hoon paused, and when he opened his eyes, there was something raw and wounded in their depths. "He made me believe I was respected, that my associates admired my leadership. In reality, many of them have spent years convinced I am cruel, unreasonable, impossible to work with, because that is what Daniel told them I said." Rita felt her heart contract with unexpected sympathy. "I'm sorry." "Why?" His gaze found hers, genuinely curious. "You do not know me. You owe me nothing. Why would you feel sorry for a criminal discovering his own weakness?" "Because betrayal hurts regardless of who you are," Rita said softly. "And because nobody deserves to spend 5 years being lied to by someone they trusted." Jae-hoon was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with that unsettling intensity she was beginning to recognize as his default expression. "You are strange, Rita Domingo. Strange and honest and—" He trailed off, shaking his head slightly. "I do not know what to do with you. You could let me go home. I could. But I will not. At least not yet." He straightened in his chair, some of his usual composure returning. "Daniel's associates are searching for the person who exposed him. They do not know your name yet, but they know a woman from the restaurant was involved. It is only a matter of time before they identify you. Until then, you are safest here. And after they identify me, then we will discuss options." His expression gave nothing away. "But I do not intend to let any harm come to you, Rita. You saved my empire. Perhaps you saved my life. That debt will be repaid. I didn't do it for a debt." "I know." Something shifted in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or something warmer. "And that is precisely why the debt exists." The following morning, Rita woke to the sound of raised voices echoing through the hallway outside her room. She dressed quickly in the clothes that had been provided, another elegant combination of cashmere and silk that she suspected cost more than her entire previous wardrobe, and slipped out to investigate. The commotion led her to a large meeting room on the ground floor, where Jae-hoon stood surrounded by at least a dozen men in expensive suits. The atmosphere was tense, voices overlapping in rapid Korean that she caught fragments of. Cannot trust any translation until. The Chun family demands explanation. Half our contacts believe we threatened them last month. Need a new interpreter immediately. Jae-hoon's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Silence. The room went instantly quiet. I will handle the Chun situation personally, he continued, his tone brooking no argument. Until we have verified which of our interpreters can be trusted, I will conduct all major negotiations through written communication in Korean. Any associate who cannot read Korean will have to wait. One of the men, older, with silver streaking his temples and an air of authority that suggested high rank, stepped forward. Boss, with respect, that approach will take too long. We have time-sensitive negotiations occurring throughout this week. The Hwang family alone requires a response within 48 hours, and their representatives speak only Mandarin and English. Then we will delay. We cannot delay. The older man's voice carried a weight of experience. Every day without proper communication is another day for Daniel's poison to spread. We need someone who can translate immediately. Someone we can trust. Jae-hoon's jaw tightened. And where do you suggest we find such a person? Every interpreter in my organization may have been compromised. Every. What about her? The question came from somewhere in the back of the room, and suddenly every eye turned toward the doorway where Rita stood frozen, caught eavesdropping like a child discovered past bedtime. Jae-hoon's expression went carefully blank. Miss Domingo is not part of this organization. She speaks Korean, someone pointed out. She understood Daniel's deception. She has no connection to anyone who might compromise her loyalties. And she clearly has no fear of speaking truth to power. She is a civilian. She is also standing in your house, wearing your clothes, and carrying secrets that would destroy you if she chose to share them. The silver-haired man smiled slightly. I would argue she is already part of this world, whether she intended to be or not. The room fell silent, waiting. Jae-hoon turned slowly to face Rita, his expression unreadable. You heard. It wasn't a question. I heard enough, she said, echoing her words from the rainy night that had started everything. And I think you should know that I also speak Mandarin. My grandmother worked for a Chinese-Korean family. She taught me both. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, for the second time since she had known him, Jae-hoon Choi smiled. Hours later, Rita found herself sitting across from Jae-hoon in his private office, a cup of tea cooling between her hands as she listened to him outline what he was proposing. The position would be temporary, he explained, his hands folded on the desk between them, until I can establish a verified network of trustworthy interpreters. During that time, you would attend all major negotiations, translate all critical communications, and serve as my primary voice in situations where English or Mandarin is required. And in exchange, compensation significantly beyond what you earned at the restaurant. Protection for as long as you require it. And he paused, something flickering behind his carefully controlled expression. Honesty. Complete honesty about everything you hear, see, and are asked to translate. No alterations. No strategic omissions. The truth, always. That's what you're offering me? Truth. That is what I am asking of you. He leaned forward slightly, his intensity focused entirely on her face. Daniel's greatest weapon was my dependence on him. My inability to communicate directly with the people around me gave him power I never intended to grant. I will not make that mistake again. If you agree to this arrangement, you will be my voice, but only my voice. Nothing more, nothing less. Rita considered the proposal carefully. It was insane. She was a waitress, not a professional interpreter. She had no experience in criminal negotiations, no understanding of the politics involved, no training in the kind of dangerous situations she might encounter. But she was also trapped. Daniel's associates were hunting for her. Her old life was effectively over. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice that sounded remarkably like her grandmother whispered that some opportunities only come once. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I need certain conditions." Jae-hoon nodded. "Name them." "First, I am not your employee. I am your contractor. That means I maintain the right to refuse any assignment that violates my personal ethics. If you ask me to translate something I find morally reprehensible, I will decline." "Agreed." "Second, you will never lie to me. If I ask a question about your business, your operations, or anything else that affects my safety, you will answer honestly or tell me the question cannot be answered. But you will never fabricate a response." A pause. Then, "Agreed." "Third," Rita hesitated, then pushed forward. "You will learn English properly. I will not be your permanent crutch. Part of my job will be helping you develop the skills to communicate independently. Once you can function without an interpreter, our arrangement ends." This time, the pause was longer. Something complicated moved through Jae-hoon's expression. Pride, perhaps, or the discomfort of acknowledging a weakness he had hidden for so long. "Agreed," he said finally. "Though I warn you, I am not an easy student. I'm not an easy teacher." For a moment, something almost warm flickered between them. Recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. Then Jae-hoon extended his hand across the desk. "We have an agreement, Rita Domingo." Rita took his hand. His grip was warm, firm, and lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "We have an agreement, Mr. Choi." By midnight, Rita lay awake in the guest room that was beginning to feel unsettlingly comfortable, staring at the ceiling and wondering how her life had transformed so completely in less than 48 hours. 2 days ago, she had been a waitress, invisible, unremarkable, moving through life with the quiet determination of someone who had learned not to expect much. Now she was the official interpreter for one of the most dangerous men in Los Angeles, living in his house, wearing his clothes, and bound to him by an agreement that felt less like employment and more like fate. She thought about Jae-hoon, the controlled mask he wore like armor, the glimpses of vulnerability she had caught beneath. She thought about the wounded expression that had crossed his face when he spoke of Daniel's betrayal, the way his voice softened when he asked about her grandmother, the almost smile that seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her. He was dangerous. She knew this. Whatever complicated feelings were beginning to stir in her chest, she could not afford to forget what he was, what he had done, what he was capable of doing. But she also couldn't forget the way he had stepped between her and danger on that rainy night, or the genuine gratitude in his eyes when she chose honesty over self-preservation. Tomorrow, her new life would begin. She wasn't sure whether to be terrified or excited. But as sleep finally claimed her, Rita Domingo realized that for the first time in years, she felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. The hope lasted exactly 12 hours. Rita's first official assignment as Jae-hoon's interpreter was a meeting with representatives from the Chun family, the same organization Daniel had been secretly negotiating with, the same people whose alliance with Jae-hoon's enemies had been orchestrated entirely without his knowledge. The meeting took place in a private room at an upscale hotel downtown, neutral territory that neither party controlled. Rita sat at Jae-hoon's right hand, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough to see the micro-expressions that crossed his face as the negotiation unfolded. The Chun representatives were polished and professional. 3 men in expensive suits who regarded Jae-hoon with barely concealed suspicion. Their leader, a silver-haired man with cold eyes, spoke primarily in Mandarin, requiring Rita to translate both directions of the conversation. "Mr. Chun wishes to know why his previous agreements with your organization should be honored," Rita said, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "Given that those agreements were apparently negotiated by a man who had no authority to speak for you." Jae-hoon absorbed this, his expression revealing nothing. When he spoke, his Korean was precise and measured. "Tell Mr. Chun that Daniel Park negotiated without my knowledge or consent. Any agreements he made are void. However, I am prepared to discuss new arrangements that would be mutually beneficial." Rita translated, watching the Chun representatives exchange glances. The silver-haired man smiled without warmth. Mr. Choi seems to have significant communication problems within his organization. How can we trust that any agreements made today will be honored when a new interpreter becomes problematic? The insult was barely veiled. Rita felt Jae-hoon's body tense beside her, felt the controlled anger radiating from him like heat. She translated the statement exactly as it was spoken, knowing it was her job to convey the truth regardless of how ugly it might be. Jae-hoon was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was ice. Tell Mr. Chun that my communication problems were caused by betrayal, not incompetence. Tell him that the man who betrayed me is no longer breathing. And tell him that anyone who questions my ability to conduct business is welcome to test that assumption personally. Rita translated. The atmosphere in the room shifted, tension crystallizing into something sharp and dangerous. The silver-haired man studied Jae-hoon for a long moment, his cold eyes calculating. Then slowly he nodded. Mr. Chun appreciates Mr. Choi's directness, Rita translated. He proposes that we begin discussing terms. The negotiation that followed was brutal, hours of careful posturing, veiled threats, and strategic concessions that left Rita's head spinning. She translated everything faithfully, watching as Jae-hoon navigated the treacherous waters with surprising skill, demonstrating a strategic mind that clearly needed no translation. By the time the meeting ended, a preliminary agreement had been reached, and Rita understood, for the first time, exactly how dangerous the man she had agreed to work for truly was. Later that evening, in the quiet of Jae-hoon's private car, he turned to her with something almost like concern in his expression. You performed well today. Rita leaned her head against the cool glass of the window. I translated words. You performed well. I just repeated what everyone said. You did more than that. Jae-hoon shifted, turning his body slightly toward hers in the intimate space of the back seat. You maintained composure under pressure. You translated Chen's insults without softening them or adding your own interpretation. You remained professional when lesser translators would have panicked. Is that rare? It is essential. He paused, studying her profile in the passing streetlights. Daniel would have altered that conversation. He would have made Chen's words seem more threatening, would have changed my responses to seem more aggressive. By the end, both parties would have been convinced the other was unreasonable. That was his method, creating conflict where none existed. Rita turned to look at him. And now I have someone who tells me the truth. His voice softened almost imperceptibly. I am beginning to understand how valuable that is. The car fell silent except for the whisper of tires on wet pavement. Rita told herself the warmth spreading through her chest was just relief that the day was over. She told herself the way her heart stuttered when Jae-hoon's eyes met hers meant nothing. She told herself this was just a job. But somewhere deep inside, she knew she was already lying to herself. And that was the most dangerous betrayal of all. The weeks that followed blurred together in a rhythm Rita had never anticipated. Early morning briefings where Jae-hoon outlined the day's negotiations, hours spent translating increasingly complex business discussions, late evening sessions where she helped him practice English phrases that twisted awkwardly on his tongue. She watched him struggle with pronunciation, his jaw tightening with frustration each time a word refused to cooperate, and she learned to recognize the exact moment his pride would crack enough to accept her gentle corrections. They developed a strange intimacy built entirely on words. She knew his voice better than anyone. The cadence of his Korean when he was confident, the subtle hesitation when he doubted himself, the dangerous softness that preceded his most cutting statements. He knew her patience, her quiet stubbornness, the way she refused to let him quit even when he slammed his palm against the table and declared English a barbaric language designed specifically to humiliate him. 3 weeks into their arrangement, Rita realized she had stopped fearing him. The realization struck during an afternoon lesson in his private study, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows as Jae-hoon struggled through a paragraph from an English novel she had selected for practice. His accent was still heavy, his rhythm still awkward, but improvement was undeniable. He had moved from barely functional to genuinely comprehensible, and occasionally, when he forgot to be self-conscious, his English carried an almost elegant quality. "You are staring," he said without looking up from the book. Rita blinked, caught. "I was thinking about how different you are from what I expected." Now he did look up, one dark eyebrow raised in question. "What did you expect? Someone cruel. Someone who enjoyed making people afraid." Rita chose her words carefully, aware she was treading into personal territory. "The stories I heard at the restaurant painted a picture of a man without mercy. Cold, calculating, incapable of humanity. And now I think you are cold and calculating because the world taught you that warmth is weakness." She held his gaze steadily. "I think you are capable of cruelty because cruelty has been necessary for survival. But I do not think you enjoy it. I think, underneath everything, you are exhausted by the weight of being untouchable." The silence that followed was profound. Jae-hoon set down the book slowly, his expression unreadable but his eyes. His eyes held something raw and exposed that made Rita's breath catch in her throat. "You see too much, Rita Domingo. You hired me to see everything. I hired you to translate. Seeing me was not part of the agreement. Maybe it should have been." The words escaped before she could stop them, hanging in the golden afternoon light like a confession neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Jae-hoon rose from his chair and moved to the window, presenting her with the elegant line of his back, the tension visible in his shoulders. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I have spent 35 years building walls, perfecting control, eliminating every vulnerability that enemies might exploit." He paused, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. "And then you appear, a waitress who sees through everything, who translates not just my words but my silences, who sits in my home and tells me truths about myself that I have spent a lifetime avoiding. Is that a complaint?" He turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his expression stole whatever breath Rita had left. "It is terrifying," he said simply, "and I am beginning to understand that I do not want it to stop." The moment stretched between them, fragile, electric, impossible to ignore. Rita should have said something professional, should have reminded him of their arrangement, of the boundaries that kept employer and contractor safely separated. Instead, she found herself standing, closing the distance between them until only inches remained. Jae-hoon. It was the first time she had used his name without the formal title. His eyes darkened at the sound of it, something dangerous and wanting flickering in their depths. "Rita." The door burst open. Mr. Kim stood in the doorway, his usually composed face tight with urgency. "Boss, we have a situation. The Park family has made contact." The spell shattered. Jae-hoon's expression transformed instantly, the vulnerability replaced by cold calculation. The man who had been standing close enough to touch disappearing behind the mask of the crime lord. He moved past Rita without acknowledgement, following Mr. Kim into the hallway with rapid Korean commands that she caught only fragments of. Rita stood alone in the study, her heart pounding against her ribs, wondering if she had imagined the entire moment. But she could still feel the ghost of his proximity, could still hear the way he had said her name. And she knew, with terrifying certainty, that nothing would ever be the same. By nightfall, Rita understood exactly what the Park family contact meant. Daniel Park had not been working alone. His betrayal was part of a larger network, a shadow organization that had been quietly positioning itself to absorb Jae-hoon's empire piece by piece. Daniel had been their inside man, their voice in the enemy's ear, and his exposure had forced them to accelerate their timeline. They wanted Jae-hoon dead, and they had made clear that anyone associated with him was considered acceptable collateral damage. Rita sat in the corner of the main meeting room, translating rapid-fire conversations between Jae-hoon and his senior advisors as they assessed the threat. The Park family had resources, money, manpower, connections that stretched across multiple cities. They had been patient for years, content to let Daniel's manipulation weaken Jae-hoon's position gradually. Now, with their primary asset eliminated, patience had transformed into aggression. "They have offered a bounty," one of the advisors reported grimly. 5 million for Mr. Choi. 1 million for anyone who provides information leading to his capture. And the woman? Another voice asked, and Rita felt every eye in the room shift toward her. 200,000. The number hung in the air, a price tag on her life, casual as a restaurant bill. Jae-hoon's voice cut through the murmuring that followed. Anyone who attempts to collect that bounty will discover exactly why the Park family has avoided direct confrontation for so many years. Rita Domingo is under my protection. That protection is absolute. Boss, with respect, resources are limited. Protecting one woman while simultaneously. Did I ask for opinions on my decisions? Jae-hoon's tone carried an edge that silenced the room instantly. She exposed Daniel's betrayal. She has served this organization with complete honesty during our most vulnerable period. If protecting her requires burning everything else, then everything else burns. Am I clear? The silence was absolute. Rita felt something shift in her chest. Gratitude, yes, but something deeper. Something that recognized the magnitude of what he had just declared in front of his entire command structure. She was not expendable. She mattered. And Jae-hoon had just made that fact undeniable. The following morning brought the first direct attempt on Rita's life. She had insisted on accompanying Jae-hoon to a meeting with potential allies, a negotiation that required both English and Mandarin translation and that could not be postponed despite the escalating danger. Security had been tripled, routes varied, protocols established. Everything that could be controlled had been controlled. But the sniper on the rooftop across the street from the meeting location had not been anticipated. The shot shattered the car window inches from Rita's head, spraying safety glass across the back seat as the driver accelerated into evasive maneuvers. She felt Jae-hoon's body cover hers before she fully registered what was happening. His weight pressing her down against the leather seat, his arms wrapped protectively around her head as more shots echoed against the armored exterior of the vehicle. His breath was hot against her ear, his heartbeat thundering against her back. "Stay down," he commanded, and for the first time since she had known him, his voice carried genuine fear, not for himself, for her. The car screamed through traffic, running red lights and mounting curbs in its desperate flight from the ambush. Rita couldn't see what was happening, could only hear shouting voices, squealing tires, the distant pop of gunfire fading as they put distance between themselves and the attackers. When the vehicle finally slowed, when Jae-hoon finally lifted himself from atop her, his hands immediately found her face, turning it gently toward the light filtering through the intact windows. "Are you injured? Rita, look at me. Are you injured?" She was shaking, couldn't seem to stop, but she managed to shake her head. No, I don't think so. Just scared." His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "You are safe. I have you. You are safe." The tenderness in his voice broke something open inside her. She had almost died. A bullet had passed close enough to send glass fragments slicing across her skin, close enough that a few inches of difference would have ended everything. And the man holding her face like she was something precious, the man whose eyes held a fear that had nothing to do with his own mortality. He had shielded her with his body without hesitation. "Jae-hoon," she whispered, and then his arms were around her properly, pulling her against his chest in an embrace that communicated everything words could not. He held her until the shaking stopped. He held her while his men reported through the vehicle's communication system, while security protocols were activated, while the full scope of the assassination attempt was analyzed. He held her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. And Rita let herself be held, let herself feel safe in the arms of a man she had sworn not to trust, let herself acknowledge the truth she had been desperately avoiding. She was falling in love with him, and from the way he refused to release her even after the danger had passed, she suspected he was falling too. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of heightened security and simmering tension. Rita was confined to the estate, her movements restricted to the house and its immediate grounds, every moment monitored by guards who had doubled in number after the shooting. She understood the necessity, but the confinement chafed. She was not built for gilded cages, no matter how comfortable the bars. Jae-hoon was rarely present during daylight hours, consumed by the war that had erupted with the Park family. She heard fragments through conversations she wasn't supposed to catch. Territories being contested, alliances shifting, violence erupting in locations across the city. The criminal underworld was convulsing, and Jae-hoon stood at the center of the storm. But he came to her every evening, sometimes exhausted, sometimes wound-tight with barely suppressed tension, sometimes carrying wounds he tried to hide until she noticed the careful way he moved and demanded to see. She learned to read his silences, to know when he needed distraction and when he needed simply to sit in the same room with another human being who expected nothing from him. Their English lessons continued, but they had transformed into something else. Conversations that wandered through philosophy, history, personal memories, dreams neither of them had shared with anyone else. Jae-hoon spoke of his childhood and soul, of a father who believed strength was the only currency that mattered, of a mother who died when he was too young to remember her face. Rita spoke of Lagos, of her grandmother's patient love, of the loneliness that had followed her across oceans and continents. They learned each other in pieces, trading fragments of themselves like currency more valuable than gold. One evening, 2 weeks after the assassination attempt, Jae-hoon arrived at her door with blood on his collar and something broken in his eyes. Rita didn't ask questions. She simply stepped aside, let him enter, guided him to the armchair by the window that had become his usual spot during their late-night conversations. She poured him a drink from the bottle she kept for exactly these occasions, pressed it into his hands, and settled on the floor at his feet with her back against the chair. The position was intimate, more intimate than anything they had shared before, but it felt right, natural, like something they had been moving toward since the night she collided with him in a rain-soaked alley. "I killed a man tonight," Jae-hoon said finally, his voice hollow. "Not the first, not the 100th, but tonight." He trailed off, taking a long drink that did nothing to chase the ghosts from his expression. What was different? He was young, 19, maybe 20, recruited by the Park family with promises of money and protection. He held a gun to my head and his hands were shaking so badly, he could barely keep it steady. Jae-hoon closed his eyes. I could have disarmed him, could have let my men take him alive. Instead, I put a bullet through his heart and watched the light leave his eyes. Why? The question was gentle, without judgment. Because I was angry. Because his fear reminded me of my own fear when I was his age. Because I have been so afraid of losing. He stopped abruptly, his jaw tightening. Losing what? The silence stretched until Rita thought he wouldn't answer. "You," he whispered finally. "I have been so afraid of losing you that I have become something monstrous. That boy was sent to kill me because killing me would mean killing everything that protects you. And instead of seeing a child who had been manipulated into violence, I saw a threat to the one person who—" He couldn't finish. Rita turned, rising onto her knees to face him properly. His eyes opened at the movement, dark and wounded and filled with something that made her breath catch. "You are not a monster, Jae-hoon. You do not know what I have done. I know what you have done for me." She reached up, her fingers brushing against his jaw with a tenderness that surprised them both. "I know that you shield me with your body when bullets fly. I know that you come here every night not because you need translation, but because you need someone who sees you. I know that the weight of your choices is crushing you, and you carry it anyway because stopping means letting everyone who depends on you fall." His hand came up to cover hers, pressing her palm against his cheek. "You should be afraid of me," he murmured. "Probably." She didn't look away. "But I am not. I have never been afraid of you, Jae-hoon. From the very first moment, I saw the man behind the reputation. And that man, exhausted, lonely, desperately pretending he doesn't need anyone, is the man I—" She couldn't say the words, but he heard them anyway. His other hand tangled in her hair, tilting her face upward as he leaned down from the chair. "Rita." Her name was a question and an answer and a plea all at once. "Yes," she whispered. He kissed her. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Rita had spent weeks denying what she felt, weeks pretending that professional boundaries meant anything when her heart raced at the sound of his voice, and she was done pretending. She kissed him back with everything she had. The world narrowed to sensation. His lips, his hands, the soft groan that escaped him when she pressed closer. He pulled her up from the floor, settling her across his lap in the armchair. His arms wrapped around her like he was afraid she might disappear. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder than either wanted to admit, Jae-hoon pressed his forehead against hers. "This is dangerous. Everything about my life is dangerous now." Rita traced the line of his jaw with her fingertip. "At least this danger feels worth the risk. They will use you against me. My enemies, my allies, everyone who wants to see me fall. They will target you because they know you matter to me. I already have a bounty on my head. I am already a target." She pulled back slightly, meeting his eyes with quiet determination. "You cannot protect me by keeping me at distance, Jae-hoon. You can only protect me by keeping me close. And I would rather be close to you and in danger than safe and alone." Something shattered behind his eyes. Some final resistance. Some last wall he had been desperately maintaining. "I do not deserve you." "Probably not." She smiled slightly. "But you have me anyway. The question is what you intend to do about it." His answer was another kiss. Deeper this time, more certain. When they finally separated for the evening, nothing physical had progressed beyond kissing, but everything between them had fundamentally changed. They were no longer employer and contractor, no longer crime lord and translator. They were something new, something neither of them had words for yet. Something that felt terrifyingly like the beginning of forever. The war with the Park family reached its climax 3 weeks later. Intelligence confirmed that the Park leadership was gathering for a major strategy session at a warehouse complex on the outskirts of the city. Jae-hoon's forces had been preparing for exactly this opportunity, a chance to eliminate the threat at its source, to end the conflict with a single decisive strike. But the operation required perfect coordination, and perfect coordination required communication that could not be intercepted or misinterpreted. It required Rita. She understood the risks before Jae-hoon even finished explaining. This wasn't a boardroom negotiation or a translation of business documents. This was a military operation, and her presence would put her directly in the line of fire. "I cannot ask this of you," Jae-hoon said, his voice strained with the effort of maintaining composure. "You are not a soldier. You did not choose this life." "No," Rita agreed. "But I chose you. And you need me. I need you alive. Then keep me alive." She caught his hands, squeezing firmly. "Your English has improved enormously, but under pressure you still default to Korean. Your men need to understand your commands instantly, without hesitation, without the delay of mental translation. In a firefight, that delay could cost lives. Including yours. Including mine." She didn't flinch from the admission. "But if I stay behind, and something goes wrong because a command was misunderstood, I will spend the rest of my life knowing I could have prevented it. That is not a weight I am willing to carry." He stared at her for a long moment, and she watched the war playing out behind his eyes. Fear battling respect, protection battling acknowledgement of her capabilities. "You will wear armor," he said finally. "You will remain within arm's reach of me at all times. If I give an order to retreat, you will obey without question. These conditions are not negotiable." "Agreed." His hands tightened on hers almost painfully. "If something happens to you, then you will finish what you started, and you will remember that I made this choice freely." Rita leaned forward, pressing a kiss against his lips that communicated everything words could not. "I am not a damsel who needs saving, Jae-hoon. I am your partner. Start treating me like one." Something shifted in his expression. Pride, perhaps, or recognition of an equal. "My grandmother would have liked you," he said quietly. "I would have liked her too." They left for the operation at midnight. The warehouse complex loomed against the night sky like a sleeping giant, its massive structures throwing long shadows across the loading docks and access roads. Rita pressed close to Jae-hoon's side as they moved through the darkness, her heart pounding against the unfamiliar weight of the body armor she wore, her ears straining for any sound that might indicate discovery. The operation began precisely as planned. Teams moved into position with military efficiency, communicating through encrypted channels that Rita monitored, ready to translate any command that required clarification. Jae-hoon led the primary assault group, his presence commanding absolute obedience from men who would have followed him into hell itself. The first shots shattered the silence at exactly 3 in the morning. What followed was chaos, controlled chaos, but chaos nonetheless. Rita found herself translating in fragments, catching Jae-hoon's rapid Korean commands and converting them to English for the American members of his team, relaying responses back with a speed she hadn't known she possessed. Northwest entrance secured, 3 hostiles down. Secondary team moving to the upper level, requesting backup. Package located in the main office. Park leadership confirmed. The commands flew faster than thought, and Rita processed each one with a clarity that surprised her. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she recognized that she was performing under pressure that should have paralyzed her. But the fear had transformed into something else, something fierce and focused. She refused to let him down. The operation reached its critical moment when the assault team breached the main office where the Park family leadership had barricaded themselves. Rita pressed against the wall beside Jae-hoon, listening to the shouted negotiations happening inside. "They are demanding safe passage," she translated rapidly. "They say they have information about other organizations that want you dead. Information they will trade for their lives." Jae-hoon's expression hardened. "Tell them their information means nothing if they are not alive to share it. Surrender unconditionally, and I will consider allowing some of them to survive." Rita conveyed the message. The response came with gunfire. Everything happened very quickly after that. Later, Rita would remember fragments. Jae-hoon pulling her behind cover as bullets tore through the wall, the deafening crack of return fire, shouting voices and running footsteps, and the acrid smell of gunpowder burning her nostrils. She would remember the way Jae-hoon's body curved around hers, shielding her from every direction simultaneously, his voice in her ear commanding her to stay low, stay still, stay alive. She would remember the exact moment everything changed. A bullet found its way past Jae-hoon's defenses. She felt the impact before she understood what had happened. A sharp, burning pressure in her side that stole her breath and turned her legs to water. She looked down and saw red spreading across her armor, dark and wrong and impossible. "Rita." Jae-hoon's voice came from very far away. "Rita, no. No, no, no." She was falling and he was catching her, and the ceiling above was spinning in ways that ceilings should not spin. "Stay with me. Do you hear me? Stay with me." She wanted to tell him she was trying. Wanted to tell him that she loved him, that she regretted nothing, that he should finish the mission and not let her death mean nothing. But the darkness was rushing up to meet her, and the last thing she saw before it swallowed her whole was his face. His beautiful, terrified, beloved face, illuminated by muzzle flashes like a painting of grief come to life. Then everything went silent. Rita woke 3 days later in a hospital room she didn't recognize. The first thing she noticed was the sunlight, golden afternoon light streaming through partially drawn curtains, catching dust motes that danced like tiny stars. The second thing she noticed was the pain, a deep, throbbing ache in her side that intensified with every breath. The third thing she noticed was Jae-hoon. He sat in a chair beside her bed, still wearing the same clothes he had worn during the operation. His face hollow with exhaustion and shadowed with stubble. His eyes were closed, his head tipped back against the chair, and for a moment she simply watched him sleep. This powerful man reduced to vulnerability by worry over her. She must have made some sound, because his eyes snapped open immediately. "Rita." Her name came out broken, desperate. He was at her bedside in an instant, his hands finding her face, her hair, her shoulders, reassuring himself through touch that she was real, that she was alive. "The doctor said 3 days, I thought." He couldn't seem to complete sentences. "I thought I lost you. Still here." Her voice came out scratchy, rough from days of disuse. "Still alive. The bullet damaged your liver. They had to operate twice. There was so much blood, and they kept saying they weren't sure if—" He stopped, and she watched him struggle for control. I have never been so afraid in my life. The operation? Successful. The Park family leadership is eliminated. The threat is neutralized. He shook his head, something raw in his expression. But I would have traded all of it, everything I have built, to take back that moment. To undo whatever decision put you in the path of that bullet. I chose to be there, and I should have refused. Should have locked you in the safest room I could find and never let you anywhere near that warehouse. You couldn't have stopped me. Rita managed a weak smile. I'm stubborn, remember? The sound he made was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers, and she felt tears that weren't her own falling against her cheeks. I love you, Rita Domingo. I love you, and I almost lost you, and I cannot survive that again. Do you understand? I cannot. Then don't lose me. I don't intend to. He pulled back slightly, his eyes fierce with determination. When you are recovered, when you are strong enough, I want to change everything. The organization, my life, our future. I want to build something legitimate. Something that doesn't require bulletproof vests and assassination attempts. That's a significant change. You are a significant person. He kissed her forehead gently. You have shown me that there is more to life than power and control. You have shown me that trust, real trust, is worth more than all the territory in the world. I do not want to spend my remaining years looking over my shoulder for the next threat. I want to spend them with you. Rita felt tears burning behind her own eyes. That sounds like a proposal. It is not. Not yet. Something flickered in his expression. Hope, perhaps, or the beginning of genuine happiness. But when you are fully healed, when you are standing on your own 2 feet, when there is no question that you are choosing me freely and not out of obligation or circumstance, then I will ask properly. And what do you think my answer will be? He smiled. Really smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. I think you are stubborn enough to make me wait for it. Rita laughed, the sound sending fresh waves of pain through her healing side. But it was worth it. Everything was worth it. 6 months later, Rita stood in the garden of the estate that had become her home, watching the sun set over a city that had nearly killed her twice. The world had changed significantly since that night in the warehouse. Jae-hoon had been true to his word, systematically dismantling the criminal elements of his empire while building legitimate businesses in their place. Import-export remained his primary focus, but now the cargo was legal, the partnerships were transparent, and the only negotiations requiring translation involved contracts instead of threats. It was difficult work. Dangerous, sometimes, as former associates resisted the changes and new competitors tried to fill the void his retreat created. But they navigated each challenge together, Rita translating not just words but entire business cultures, helping bridge gaps that had seemed insurmountable. His English had improved dramatically. He no longer needed her for basic communications, no longer relied on her presence for routine meetings. But he wanted her there anyway, wanted her perspective, her honesty, her willingness to challenge him when he was wrong. They had built something real, something lasting, something that her grandmother would have been proud of. You are thinking again. Jae-hoon's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar. I'm always thinking. True. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. What about this time? About how different everything is. About how a rainy night and an overheard conversation changed the entire trajectory of my life. Regrets? None. She turned in his arms, facing him properly. Not a single one. He studied her face in the golden sunset light, his expression soft in a way that still surprised her sometimes. The cold mask of the crime lord was gone now, replaced by something warmer, more human. I have something for you, he said. Another gift? You spoil me. You saved my empire and nearly died doing it. Spoiling you is the least I can do. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box, elegant, velvet-covered, unmistakably meaningful. Rita's breath caught. Jae-hoon. You are healed, he said quietly. You are standing on your own 2 feet. There is no question that you are choosing me freely. Which means, He opened the box, revealing a ring that caught the dying sunlight and threw rainbows across his face. I can finally ask properly. He lowered himself to one knee. Rita Domingo, you came into my life as a waitress carrying secrets and left as the woman who sees me more clearly than I have ever seen myself. You translated not just my words but my soul. You fought beside me, nearly died for me, and rebuilt yourself stronger than before. I do not deserve you. I will probably never deserve you. But I want to spend every remaining day of my life trying to earn the gift of your presence. Tears were streaming down her face now. Will you marry me? The word came without hesitation. Yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, rose to his feet, and kissed her with all the passion and tenderness that had built between them over months of shared danger and growing trust. When they finally separated, both breathless and smiling, Rita pressed her forehead against his. My grandmother would have definitely liked you. I wish I could have met her. She would have said that truth is a currency more valuable than gold. Rita smiled through her tears, and she would have been proud that I found someone who finally understood what that meant. They stood together in the fading light, the ring glinting on her finger, the future stretching out before them like an unwritten story. It would not be easy. The transition from criminal empire to legitimate business would take years. There would be setbacks, challenges, moments when the old ways seemed easier than the new. But they would face it together. Two people from completely different worlds who had found in each other something neither expected. Honesty in a world of lies, trust in a world of betrayal, love in a world that had tried so hard to make them both cold. The Korean Mafia boss had trusted his translator, until a Nigerian waitress revealed the truth. And in revealing that truth, she had given him something far more valuable than any empire could have been. She had given him the chance to become someone worth loving. And he had become exactly that. The end. Thank you for experiencing this story with us. If this journey of danger, betrayal, and unexpected love resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories that explore the beautiful complexity of human connection across cultures and circumstances. Your support helps us continue creating narratives that matter.